Welcome in, everybody. It is Phil Friday in the Gun, episode 97. As always, this episode of ITG brought to you by Bet Online, where the game starts. I'm Schuyler, Callihan. That's Jed Drenning. Again, we'll be joined by Phil Steele here in a moment. There's no West Virginia game this week, but we're going to talk to him about his thoughts on West Virginia's win over TCU and maybe a sneak peek into what they have left on the schedule, as well as the top 25 and Big 12 matchups to watch. So, Jed, before we get into that, let's go ahead and talk about our picks from last week. West Virginia TCU, as you know, we always end the show with a couple of handicap picks that we like to go with and we kind of create here on the fly. But let's see how we did this past week, Jed. I didn't do too hot last week. Hopefully you got some better news for me this week.
Well, the first one's painful for both of us because time of possession has played an interesting role in recent years in this game. One of the reasons West Virginia took TCU into the final minutes in a one-score game before TCU separated Morgantown last year was the Mountaineers held the ball for 36 minutes. Last time we won in TCU 2 years ago, we held the ball for 35 minutes. So we pegged the over-under at West Virginia 33 and a half minutes, over or under. We both took the over 33 and a half minutes, so technically 33 minutes and 30 seconds. West Virginia held the football Saturday night for 33 minutes and 27 seconds. So we both missed.
Oh, man.
It was not
I actually think that's even more impressive on your part. You're like Vegas right there. You nailed it.
I hit the over-under, yeah.
Gee whiz.
Well, I tell you what, we hit another one here. We'll get to it in a minute. But the second one we asked was, will West Virginia outrush TCU? Interesting question. We knew that had to be one of the strengths of what we were going to try and do from a game planning standpoint. Of course, it was in and out with the quarterback situation. Garrett ends up being the starter. Garrett played a critical role in that, obviously, as the team's leading rusher. But what made it interesting was Imani Bailey came into the game as the Big 12's leading rusher. He's dynamic. TCU was really a handful on the ground. So it was a simple question. Will West Virginia outrush TCU? You said yes. I said no. You hit that one. West Virginia ended up with 201 yards rushing. TCU with 135. That might have been one of the more impressive things West Virginia did. Was Imani Bailey to 55 yards and less than 3 yards a carry. Because I'm telling you, that's an NFL back. He's a stud.
Absolutely.
So moving forward to number 3. One of the big things last year in Morgantown, of course, one of the indictments, rightfully so, against the West Virginia defense overall last year was the sheer mass of big plays that the Mountaineer defense allowed, particularly on the back end through the pass game. But in the loss against TCU in Morgantown, the 41-31 loss, one of the big differences in that game was the Frogs had 4 plays of 50-plus yards. That was kind of the poster child for bad football for the West Virginia defense last year, giving up those big plays. So based on the overall improvement of the defense this year, they had allowed 1 play of 50-plus yards through 4 games, and that was the early touchdown by Penn State on the pass. So we said, okay, quite simply, will TCU have 1 play of 50-plus yards?
They sure did.
Well, you said no. I said yes. John Paul Richardson on their first possession, 59 yards for the touchdown. They ran an RPO. We missed a tackle in space. They made a nice play, 59 yards. That was the only play they had of 50-plus yards. So I hit that one. So it looks like we were both 2 and well. Let me tell you.
I was 1 and 2.
We were both 1 and 2. We both missed the first one. I missed the second one. Yeah, so we were both 1 and 2.
We had a bad beat on that time of possession, though. But that's, again, comes down to you knowing something with Vegas and the numbers and all that stuff. So
we were close with the 50-yard play.
Yeah.
We said, well, they have 1, and we were close with the time of possession. So,
and I just still can't believe, like, when you go back to that game and how things kind of felt going into halftime with TCU scoring at the end of the half, they have the ball coming out. You're kind of thinking that's a crucial part of the game, right? Like, this is a potential part, where they could just kind of take over this thing. And West Virginia comes out, gets the 3 and out, and it's a completely different ball game. They had 1 total yard of offense in that third quarter.
1 total yard, 129-1. We outgained them after giving 312 yards in the first half. And
you don't see that very often.
No, and we talked about this, Schuyler, off air. a big part of what played out in critical junctures in that game. Even though West Virginia, we had 4 sacks against a team that was tough to sack. They'd allowed the second fewest sacks in the Big 12, and the more I studied them on tape, the
Yeah.
more impressed I was by their O-line after losing Steve Avila. They lost some really good pieces to that offensive line last year, and they've done a great job of coaching them up with some replacements, and they had done a super job of protecting Chandler Morris. Well, we didn't give up a single sack, and they led the Big 12 in sacks, and we sacked him 4 times. But not only did we sack him 4 times, we kept hitting him. And now West Virginia is to the point, one of the metrics that you look at, some people call it quarterback knockdowns and track it differently. Sports Info Solutions might. Pro Football Focus calls it quarterback hits. Well, one of the key metrics for West Virginia this year has been that quarterback hits metric.
Yeah.
We now, through 5 games, have 30 quarterback hits through 5 games. And through all of last year, we only had 22. Now, that's terrific news. Now, one of the issues that we have to find a way to compensate, the team leader with 8 quarterback hits was Trey Lathan, who really had found his knack for getting to the passer and impacting things, even if it wasn't a sack and you didn't get all the way home. But West Virginia with 30 quarterback hits, and trust me, as a former quarterback, that impacts things. And I'll tell you what,
Absolutely.
It's impacted. West Virginia through 5 games defensively also has held the opposition to the lowest completion percentage in the Big 12 at just 50%. Those 2 things are directly interlinked. I'm telling you, as a former guy that used to stand back there and take those shots, that has an impact. It makes it difficult for opposing quarterbacks. So kudos to Jordan Leslie and this West Virginia defense for finding ways that don't even always show up on the stat sheet or on paper for impacting the football game and helping West Virginia out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that I've kind of took away from these last 2 games against Texas Tech and TCU, if you get a tempo team or an up-tempo team to play more your style of football, that physical in the trenches, defensive, slug it out game, they don't like to play that. They don't like that. Yeah, and that is a thing that West Virginia can do and live by every single week. So I think if you can win in the trenches, play good in your front 7, you've got a chance every single week, especially when you can run the ball as well. West Virginia's doing all those things. So they head into the bye week 4-1, 2-0 in Big 12 conference play. And real quick before we get into Phil here, a word from our friend JR and his buddies there at Toothman Ford. We all know cars cost less at Grafton. If you're looking for an automobile, go ahead and get your butt to Grafton and see our guy JR to get you a new car. So let's say we get right into Phil here. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with Phil to preview the top matchups in the well, I guess it is pretty much the SEC this week. We got a lot of SEC games on the slate for the top 25, the Big 12, and then we'll ask Phil on his thoughts for West Virginia and TCU. So we'll be back here with Phil in just a moment, right here around the break. You've been in the gun.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
All right, guys, we are back with the man, the myth, the legend, Phil Steele. Again, you can get his magazine at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Phil's with us every Friday, breaking out Big 12 Top 25 and WVU. Phil, how you doing, my man?
You know, I am doing great, but probably not as great as you guys. Outstanding 4-1 start for West Virginia.
Yeah, we feel pretty good about it. 4-1 is something I think everybody would have signed up for 5 games in based on the 3rd toughest schedule in college football. So we feel pretty good about it. But Phil, we're going to jump right into some SEC action. We can't be sitting here in the Mountain State and do a podcast like this without asking about the matchup with Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher. Alabama heading to Texas A&M. Last time they were there a couple of years ago, Jimbo managed to pull the upset. A lot of different things going on with these 2 teams this time around. How do you see this unfolding?
Yeah, and remember last year, both teams were without their starting quarterback, and the game was in Alabama. Texas A&M was struggling through a losing season, and yet at the end of the game, A&M's at the 2-yard line of Alabama, throwing with the chance to win the game on the final play, down by 5 points. So A&M is matched up well against Alabama, and to me, this is a matchup game. And a matchup I'm going to isolate on, guys, is the Texas A&M defensive front. The last 2 weeks in SEC play, they've had 15 tackles for loss each week, 7 sacks in both games. In fact, they've got 20 sacks on the season. They're getting to the quarterback nearly 20% of the time. What's Alabama's weakness this year? Well, it's not defense. I think Jalen Milroe's good enough. I think their running backs are good enough. Their wide receivers are not what you're used to at Alabama, but their weakness is the offensive line. They've given up 20 sacks this year. That's a sack every 18% of the time he drops back to pass. That's ridiculous for Alabama. So I love that matchup for Texas A&M. College Station, it's going to be loud. They won the last time here. They're confident. They know they can beat Alabama. They've done it. And the matchup I love is their defensive line against the offensive line. So add it all up, I think the wrong team's favored here. I like A&M not only to win this game, but they're my favorites to win the SEC West this year.
Wow. Yeah. And I can see that happening, certainly. So, keeping in the SEC, LSU at Missouri. This seems like it's a crucial game for LSU. Obviously, they dropped that shootout last week to Ole Miss. They're now 3-2. They go on the road against Missouri, who has won now. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4 straight one-score games. But they also have maybe one of the better quarterbacks in the country no one knows about, Brady Cook. Can the Tigers keep it close and maybe even pull off the upset in this game against the Tigers?
Yeah, and Brady Cook just set the SEC record for most consecutive passes without an interception. So that's impressive. He's got 11-0 ratio this year, but that dates back to last year. Now, as you mentioned, when you look at Missouri, they're a team that hasn't really blown teams away. You know, Kansas State had a couple of double-digit leads on them. They got past Memphis by 7. Last week, the Vanderbilt game was actually a 14-point game, and Vanderbilt got stopped on downs on its own 19-yard line, and then Missouri tacked on a touchdown late to get the cover there. So it hasn't been overly impressive. I think it's a desperate game for LSU. They absolutely have to win this game. They've shown they can go on the road and win. Remember, they went to Mississippi State and won that thing comfortably, 41-14. So add it all up. I'm going to go with LSU to come out of here with the win on the road, but Missouri will give them a good game.
Okay. We have the Maryland Terps at 5-0, 2-0 in Big Ten play, unranked. Mike Locksley obviously going to be playing the disrespect card as they head to Columbus to face number 4 Ohio State. How do you see this thing going?
Yeah, I love the job Coach Locksley is doing. In fact, this spring they lost a lot off the offensive line. They lost a lot off the defensive line. And when I talked to Coach Locksley and was going over the team with him, I voiced my concerns about the offensive line, and he was a little concerned, but said we'll probably be better than expected. And they're doing well. They've only given up 3 sacks all year. They're averaging 5.1 yards per carry. Now, granted, they've taken on a pretty weak schedule. They haven't really taken on any team that's going to get to a bowl game yet this year. Charlotte, Virginia, Michigan State, and Indiana, none of those teams are going to get to a bowl. They're taking a large step up here. And defensively, same thing. I voiced my concerns about the defensive line. He said he was a little concerned, but felt they'd be better than expected. They're only allowing 3.5. But this is going to be a much better test. And for Ohio State, Kyle McCord struggled early, and they sort of limited him early. But I thought that last drive against Notre Dame might be the one that flips the light switch on for him. The one thing I like best about this game, I think Maryland will give Ohio State a game. But the thing I like best is probably the over in this game. When I look at Kyle McCord, I think that Ohio State offense will be able to put up the points. And the last 8 times these teams have met, the game has not only gone over the total, they've averaged 80 points per game, and the total's in the 50s here. So I like over in the Ohio State-Maryland game is my favorite play there. I do think Ohio State wins, but I think it'll be somewhere around the line. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, and I don't think it's going to be a 3 to 7 point game either.
Another big one in the SEC, number 20 Kentucky on the road taking on the top dog Georgia Bulldogs. And Kentucky, man, they had a heck of a day on the ground last week and just ran all over Florida. Last year, this was a 16-6 game. It was a very slow, offensive kind of paced day. Mark Stoops has hung his hat on the way that they've played defense over the years, but the offense has got to show up in this one. Doesn't look like they've been very pleased to this point with how Devin Leary's played. Do they have enough answers offensively to pull a stunner down there in Georgia?
No, I think Georgia, there's a lot of talk. Why are they number 1 in the country? Because when you look at their body of work from the year and their opponents, they really haven't blown anybody out. And they haven't really played that big. I mean, South Carolina and Auburn, okay, they're good. They'll probably both be in bowl games, but not an overwhelming schedule this year. However, I think this week Georgia does play its A game. You're talking about taking on a 5-0 Kentucky, a ranked Kentucky team, and what you just mentioned about the rush. Georgia last week gave up 219 yards on the ground. Kentucky ran for 329 yards. So Georgia will look at that and go back and look at that Auburn game a little bit closer. 66 of those 219 yards came between the tackles. Most of it was quarterback runs. They had that one long run that Thorne had down the sideline, and it was a lot of outside stuff. Well, guess what? Devin Leary is not going to run the football here for Kentucky. And last week, Devin Leary only hit 9 of 20 passes for 69 yards against Florida. Granted, he didn't have to throw, but it was a very unproductive game. So I think Georgia takes away what Kentucky does, and they've been able to shut down Kentucky in years past. Kentucky's got very few yards and points against Georgia. In fact, if you look over the last 4 years, they've totaled 22 points in the 4 games. They average about 5 points per game. I think Georgia plays its A game this week. I like the Bulldogs to play their best game and win this one by more than the spread.
Last one, Phil, before we get into Big 12 play. We mentioned the 5-0 yet unranked Maryland Terps. Well, now we have the 5-0 but barely ranked at number 25 Louisville Cardinals hosting Notre Dame, who held on for a nice win at Duke last week.
Yeah, and I was concerned about the Notre Dame Duke game last week because of the situation Notre Dame was in. They were coming off that last second end of the play game loss against Ohio State, a game they had won, and you wondered if they'd be able to get up. Duke, meanwhile, was off an easy game. They had game day on hand. They were fired up, and Notre Dame handled the task. They pretty much controlled the first half of the game, but needed to come back to get the win. I don't think they're in a bad situation this week. I think they're in a good situation. They're another week removed from that tough loss to Ohio State. And if we look at Louisville and put them under the microscope a little bit, the Georgia Tech game, they actually got outgained, only won the game by 5. The Indiana game, remember, Indiana's at the 1-yard line with a chance to win. They go for it on 4th down and get stopped. Once again, a very close game statistically. In the NC State game, they trailed the entire game until they'd taken a lead in the 4th quarter and pulled out a 13-10 win. Haven't been blown away with Louisville overall. I have been blown away with Notre Dame. I think they're a team that's a legitimate national title contender. They've won 30 straight games against the ACC, but more importantly, they've covered the last 10 games against the ACC. They're laying less than a touchdown. I like Notre Dame to take care of business on the road and win this by more than a touchdown.
We'll flip on over to the Big 12 now. Kansas State at Oklahoma State. Mike Gundy likes to play quarterback roulette down there with the 3 quarterbacks he's got. I don't know if he's ever going to settle on 1 or maybe even 2 guys at this point. But, Phil, is this just an easy week here for Kansas State, or are they actually going to get a little bit of a run for their money?
Well, I just have a lot of respect for Coach Gundy. I think he's one of the better coaches out there. And with a bye, with the team at 2-2, desperate, got to turn it around. I think they will. And he stuck with Alan Bowman last week in their last game against Iowa State. Bowman played the entire game, threw for 278 yards, and the offense actually came to life. They put up 409 yards against a pretty good Iowa State defense. This is one of those circle the wagons, back to the wall type of games. Remember the Baylor-Utah game a couple weeks back? This is one of those games for Oklahoma State. They're taking on a ranked Kansas State team. They're at home. They need a win, and they're a big underdog. And I think sticking with Alan Bowman last week was the key. I look for Oklahoma State to play its best game of the year. I like the Cowboys in a potential upset here.
Wow.
How about that? That's a bold pick. We like it. All right, now let's go to Red River. A year ago, and I think Oklahoma has mentioned this a time or two in their locker room since, 49 Longhorns. Something tells me, I don't know what will play out, but it might look different than Oklahoma throwing for 39 yards because it's not going to be Davis Bevel behind center. This time it's going to be Dylan Gabriel, who missed that game a year ago.
Yeah, and that is a huge part of this, and that's why Oklahoma was able to get Jackson Arnold in there as the backup quarterback. They needed somebody that, if in case something happens to Gabriel, and it's been a great offense this year. Now, they have struggled in a couple of games. You go back to that SMU game, they only led by 7 in the fourth quarter, ended up winning by 17. The Cincinnati game, I wasn't blown away with Oklahoma in that one. They only won 20-6 on the road. So the offense has been potent. They've been putting up big numbers, 510 yards per game, but they're taking on by far the best defense they've faced all year in Texas. I can't say that for Texas. Texas putting up 478 yards per game. Are they taking on the best defense? Oklahoma's got a good defense statistically, but I'll take Alabama's defense over that, and yet they put up 454 yards against Texas. I think the offenses are close. And while the defenses statistically are close, my eye test says that Texas has the better defense, better athletes, better front seven, better secondary. My eye test also says Texas has the better special team. So I do think Texas is the better team. This is a rivalry game. Oklahoma's playing with legitimate revenge. They have Dylan Gabriel. I'd like Texas to win the game probably by about 7. So it's right around where the number is. I'm surprised the number is under 7 in this one. So I actually like Texas a little bit. I think they win this by around a touchdown, but it should be a great game. And you know what? It's been since 2011 that these two have matched up undefeated. It's good to see these two back as powers again.
UCF at Kansas, and man, what a heartbreaker for the Golden Knights, or the Knights, last week against Baylor. My goodness, that was one of the crazier games in all of college football, maybe this year. If you go back and watch how that game unfolded there late, they blow a 28-point lead to the Bears, an opportunity to get their first Big 12 win. They don't. How do they respond going on the road to Lawrence against the Jayhawks?
And who knew Jalen Daniels wasn't going to play last week for Kansas against Texas? Sort of surprised the nation we didn't show up. And, got to hand it to Kansas. They played a good first half. They were only down 13-7. They had been greatly outgained, 342-139, but they were in the game and then ended up getting blown out 661 to 260 yards. Jason Bean had done well in the reserve role last year when he was thrown into the lineup. Just struggled against a very good Texas defense. But this is a different animal. Kansas has played very well at home. They beat Illinois by 11. They beat BYU by 11. And UCF hasn't played as well on the road. You go back to that Kansas State game. I believe they got a late touchdown in that game to pull within 44-31. So I just think the home is the difference here. I like Kansas to get this one at home. I do think Jalen Daniels plays. I don't know if John Rice Plumlee will play. Timmy McClain has looked pretty good. How about that play that McClain had at the end of the game, escaping like 27 tackles and throwing a first down on 3rd and long? But I got to go with Kansas to get this win at home.
And talk about that UCF game, Phil. Well, Baylor was standing at 1-3. They were down by 28 points late on the road. Their season was absolutely on the brink. They pulled it out. Now they return home feeling probably pretty good about themselves against a Texas Tech team that had a bounce back game against Houston. But here we go again with the specter of that poor Texas Tech record on the road, 1-6 in true road games under Joey McGuire, heading to Waco. This is a very fascinating matchup.
Yeah, and it's interestingly, when I had my conversation with Coach Aranda over the after spring was over, we were going over the teams. I asked him point blank. I said, Coach, what's the difference between 2021 and 2022, and why the 4-game losing streak at the end? And he gave me a long dissection of what happened, but basically summing it up, it was that the team in 2021 believed it could win at the end of the game. And 2022, they didn't really have that same belief. And when the going got rough in the fourth quarter, they sort of didn't follow through. I think that win over UCF will give this team that belief that the 2021 team had. So I'm looking for Baylor to have a great finish to the season based on the fact that now when they get to the fourth quarter, it doesn't matter if they're down by 10 points. They're going to think they can win the game. And I think getting Blake Shapen back last week helped as well. Shapen didn't have a great 2021. He's not a great quarterback, but he is better than Sawyer Robinson. Getting him back, I think, was huge last week. And then we've talked about it all year with Texas Tech. I like Texas Tech at home. I don't like Texas Tech on the road. Now, they lost at Wyoming. They lost to West Virginia. I gave you the record over the years and summed it up. And they're going on the road as a favorite at Baylor. I think Baylor is the better team at home. I like Baylor to pull the upset here and get the home win.
Man, that'd be incredible to go from a potential 1-4. They storm all the way back to beat UCF, and then they get back to even there. The last one on the Big 12 slate, it's TCU at Iowa State. Obviously, the Cyclones got beat up pretty good by Oklahoma last week, but no one's going to fault them for that. A lot of people aren't going to have that issue. TCU, obviously, we're going to talk about that here in a minute with West Virginia, but they fall to the Mountaineers 24-21. How do you see this one playing out, Phil?
Yeah, and I like what I've seen out of Iowa State for the most part this year. You go back to the Iowa game that they lost; they had the yardage edge, a 19-9 first down edge in that game. The Ohio game was a defensive struggle as expected, and even the Oklahoma game. If you were watching the game in the second quarter, it's 21-20, and Oklahoma had an interception return for a touchdown at the start of the game. So Iowa State had basically played them even, maybe even outplayed them a little bit. And then in Oklahoma, bam, bam, and they got an interception, a touchdown with like seconds to go in the half. And then the second half was a different story. Oklahoma just dominated from there. But the first half was very even. I think Iowa State at home is a very dangerous team. Jack Trice Stadium, you've got Rocco Becht playing better than expected, hitting 60% with a 9.5 ratio. And TCU has proven they're not last year's TCU. Their best game of the season, was probably SMU in Houston, but against the best competition, Colorado and West Virginia, they've come up short. Now they're playing a pretty good team on the road. I like Iowa State to potentially pull the upset here.
But they're tough. I'll tell you what, they're tough under the lights at Jack Trice. I can speak to that. But let's get your thoughts real fast, Phil. West Virginia's win at Fort Worth. That line had climbed, as we talked about last week, up to, in some places, 14 points by the time we got down there. 2 years ago, West Virginia won on the road down there. Since that game, the Frogs had won 10 of 11 in that facility. And we handed Sonny Dykes his first regular season loss as a Big 12 coach. So what were your thoughts on West Virginia's win at TCU?
I thought they played they played the game that they needed to play in that game. In the first half, it wasn't pretty. Got outgained, we're trailing by 7 at the half. You're hoping they can hang in there. But what a second half that they played. And I thought Garrett Green had an excellent game. They did what they had to do. They ran the football, which I think takes TCU out of its game, as I mentioned last week. And, running for over 200 yards against TCU is a very good thing to do, especially on the road. It wasn't an overwhelming pass game, but that's not West Virginia's style. When I talked to Neil Brown, he talked about the offensive line, talked about the run game. That's their strength. And they were able to assert themselves in the second half. And I love the way the defense is playing this year. They're actually holding opponents to 47 yards per game below their season average. That's top 40. So I think this is a West Virginia team that's, as each week progresses and each win comes in, now they're expecting to win. And they've got a winnable game coming up against Houston on the road.
Yeah, and Phil, before I get you out of here, I got to ask you. I mean, this team is absolutely surpassing expectations. They were picked 14th, obviously dead last in the Big 12 conference. That's something that this team has kind of hang its hat on to use as motivation throughout the season. You look at these final 7 games, and I mean, there's a real chance, I think, that they could get to maybe 9 or 10 wins. I mean, I'm looking at the schedule here. We'll throw it up on the screen. They're probably going to be favored, I would assume, in at least 5 of these last 7 games. Do you feel like there's a chance that they could get to that 9 or 10 win mark?
Well, I do think they'll beat Houston. They should be favored against Oklahoma State at home. So those are 2. They should be favored against BYU at home. I think they could beat Cincinnati. At UCF is going to be tough. The Bounce House is always one of the tougher venues out there. They play their best ball there. I think they'll be an underdog there. They'll be an underdog at Oklahoma. And if the switch has turned for Baylor and Dave Aranda has his team playing like I think he can the second half of the year, they'd be an underdog at Baylor in that game. So that would be 8 wins. But then again, I didn't expect them to beat TCU. I thought they'd play TCU very tight last week. Didn't expect them to win the game outright. They did. So I think 9 is a possibility this year. Right now, I'd put their total at about 8.
Yeah, and I think if you finish with 8 wins, that's a very successful season. Considering the circumstances, all the hot seat talk about Neil Brown, he's going to go from maybe the hot seat to the coach of the year in the Big 12 if he does so. So, Phil, we appreciate your time once again. Every single Friday, you can catch Phil Steele previewing Big 12 top 25 in West Virginia. here on In the Gun. Phil, we thank you for your time. We'll chat next week.
Hey, Phil, real fast.
Hey, sounds
So
sure.
I saw another podcast. Do you have your own podcast that you want to hit here? It looked interesting. I was listening to you on something.
Yeah, every Friday morning I put out the Phil Steele Plus Tour with selections, and what I do is I show you all the stuff that I have on Phil Steele Plus, graphically say why I like a game, and show you some very interesting things. And the Phil Steele Plus highlights things in green and red. So check it out. Go to philsteele.com or the YouTube, and it's the Phil Steele Plus Tour with selections. And you picked a good week because this week I'm actually guaranteeing a winning week on there, or you get a free issue of my newsletter next week. So it should be a lot of fun. But do check that out if you get a chance.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to that right as we speak. Phil, we appreciate your time once again, and we'll chat next week.
Hey, sounds great. A lot of fun talking with you guys, and congrats on 4-1. Let's keep this thing rolling this year.
Yeah, absolutely. The Mountaineers don't have to worry about a game this week. We can feel good about this weekend. So 4-1, 2-0 in Big 12 conference play. Again, that's Phil Steele. You can get his stuff at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, and obviously where he just plugged there as well. So thanks to Phil. We're going to be back here in a minute to wrap things up here on In the Gun.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
For more West Virginia Mountaineer football content, be sure to follow us on Twitter at In the Gun Podcast.
All right, Judd. So we'll wrap things up here. Phil, always great talking to him. I love the fact that he loves how West Virginia is playing, and he even kind of gave the 8-4 prediction a little bit. But again, I mean, there is a path for 9 or 10 wins, but if you get to 8-4, you still have to be extremely happy with how things have unfolded this season. So anyways, again, we have the bye week this week, so there's no game. There's not going to be a preview, but we are going to have an abbreviated week next week because of the game being on Thursday against Houston and Dana Holgorsen. So, Jed, go ahead and enlighten the people how we're going to be bringing the coverage to them next week because of the shortened week and how we're going to go about
it. Yeah, we're planning on having Big Daddy. Of course, I have to powwow with the rest of the crew, but Big Daddy, we'll get together with him and have it out on Tuesday. We should have our Houston preview on Wednesday. And at least I'm planning right now, we will have Phil up on Thursday for a handful of hours before the Thursday night game against Houston. I might be taping that in a Houston hotel room, the way it looks right now. But that's what's interesting about it. But I just closing this. He always brings such tremendous insight. I tell you what I found fascinating before we hit some West Virginia stuff to close out. The fascinating part was he's gaming this out for Texas A&M and Jimbo, saying that, hey, they might be the leader in the clubhouse to win the SEC West and go to Atlanta for the SEC title game. And he takes them to knock off Nick. That'd be 2 wins in a row.
Yeah.
College Station. And as he said, they almost knocked them off in Tuscaloosa last year. But that was pretty fascinating. But, you know, as far as the West Virginia projections, here's where I always go on this. You know, him saying that he sees us as an 8-win team, it makes perfect sense the way he's looking at the schedule and gaming that out. I always think this. One of the most difficult things in college football to do is to win all the games you're supposed to.
Yep.
That is one of the single most challenging things, is to go an entire season winning every game you're supposed to win. You don't just show up and do that. That means you show up and took care of business and brought it. So yes, West Virginia is going to be favored in a number of these games. And as he said, he didn't expect us to go on the road and win this TCU game. So maybe there's another game or two that you snatch out there. But be careful, because there might also be a game lurking on the horizon that you don't see coming, that you're about and don't know it. You're about to take on some team's best effort of the season, and you don't play as well as you should. And you're going to have to find yourself clawing out of that. That's the mark of a good team. A good team can, of course, have a chance or a puncher's chance to win when it plays well, but all teams don't play well every week. You also have to be a pitcher who doesn't bring your best stuff and find a way to dig down deep and win some of that. And you've seen West Virginia do that so far. We haven't played our best football. Neil Brown says this all the time. Our best football is in front of us. So at what point will we see that, or will we see it at all? There's no guarantee we will, as we strive toward getting better. But that's the challenge I always look at. I've told you, Schuyler, I have my 12 teams theory, and I've said this.
It's smart too. It makes a whole lot of sense.
Well, people always ask, well, how can you beat this team but lose to that team? Because you're never the same team. There's 20-year-old kids, okay? There's 100 of them in a locker room. They're never the same team twice, or they're rarely the same team twice. So if you play 12 games, there's really 12 versions of who you are as a team, in terms of your best version down to your worst version. Now, I would argue maybe the more consistent teams don't have 12. They have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 versions, if that makes sense. But you're never going to be the same team every week. I always ask people, have you ever made a foul shot? And their answer is, of course they have. Just about everybody walking the planet, including even me, has made a foul shot. Okay? Well, then my follow-up question is, well, have you ever missed one? Well, if you made the last one, there's no variables that have changed. It's 3 seconds after you made one. Why can't you always make the next one? It's the same rim, the same distance, the same ball. You haven't changed. There's nothing else going on in your life that's new from 3 seconds ago. Make the next one. But see, sometimes you miss the second one. Well, now just imagine 118 to 22-year-old kids in a locker room with all the influences and all the things that are going on in their lives on a daily basis that you don't know. Sometimes you do, sometimes you address it, sometimes you can't. And you're facing a team with 118 to 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds in their locker room. It's never the same team twice.
No,
it never is. So the question is, how consistent can you be, and how close to operating at maximum level can you get? So that's why it's infinitely challenging to, in a given year, win all the games you should win. And that when I look at schedules, that's one of the first things I consider. You ask yourself, hey, if the season is starting and you have a 12-game schedule, let me ask you, if you were to pick out the 3 toughest games, okay, and remove those, are you pretty sure that you could go 8-1 or 9-0 with the other 9? You see what I'm saying?
No, not at all.
It's always been difficult, no matter who you were and where you were. So it's about trying to get better each week. That's what you're striving towards. That's why you hear coaches say it all the time. And again, when you look at the limitations West Virginia has shown, particularly in the pass game, I mean, there are areas this team needs to get better to continue to find ways to win. But if you can get a little better each time out and just build on some of the things that you do have, we have a lot of good things going on. Obviously, the improvements on the defensive side of the football at all 3 levels. Now you're going to have to overcome some critical injuries on that side. Your depth is a pretty big issue. We have depth at D-line, not so much at backer, not so much in the secondary. On the offensive side, we feel like we have a ground game we can run on, but it's not cranking to the point that we need it to crank quite yet. And we obviously need to get the pass game going. We need to be a more well-rounded offense. Special teams is playing a critical role in helping us win games. Now you need to continue to improve there. So you need to continue to improve in the area of playing smart football. Yes, we're avoiding penalties, but you heard what Neil said about how we responded to that second blocked field goal. That was nearly catastrophic.
Oh,
so
yeah.
We want to keep finding little ways to get better. We're playing smart football. We're playing solid football in most areas. But there's some obvious areas we need to get better. You're going to have some teams coming up. I mean, we're going to be going to Houston next week that is a desperate wounded animal that will pull out all the stops at home.
Oh, yeah.
to try and do what they can to overcome that. I mean, they desperately need that win. And then Oklahoma State's coming to that. None of these are empty chairs. None of these are layups where you just show up and you really have to play that well and you just automatically win. There's no such thing. So
Exactly.
how do you manage that with 18 to 22-year-old kids? And now you're going to reach the point, even at 4-1 heading into a bye week, where how do you handle even a little bit of prosperity? Because now the kids are going to start hearing, hey, you're overcoming, or you're overachieving the expectations. You've defeated all these expectations, and you're playing so much better than anybody thought. Well, you got to manage that, manage that success, manage that prosperity. So there's different things to consider with all of this. But again, never forget, one of the single most difficult things in all of college football to do. Now, people are going to point out the 5 or 6 blue bloods that don't often lose a game they shouldn't. What about the other 125?
Exactly.
Like us. The other 125 or 130 teams playing college football have to worry about what I'm saying. And that is, it is supremely difficult to win all the games you're supposed to. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, like Phil just said, I mean, Oklahoma State, they have looked god-awful all year, especially offensively. Well, they found potentially an answer at quarterback. That could change their season. Baylor coming back the way they did, that could change their season. That's just 2 games right there. And there's a guy or 2 or 3 or 4 on that Houston roster that has this game circled on Thursday night.
Yeah.
So you're gonna get a lot of teams' best shots.
Yeah.
And especially UCF, you go on the road there, like you mentioned, the bounce house is tough to play. I believe that's their homecoming game. So you're gonna go into some tough environments. You're gonna play some tough teams. Oklahoma is no stroll in the park. Obviously, they're going to be wanting revenge from that loss a year ago. So there's a lot of tough things. The one thing I do want to note, though, West Virginia still has all 4 newcomers in the Big 12 on their schedule, and not a single Big 12 newcomer to this point, again, it's only been a couple of weeks, has beaten an original Big 12 team. The only team that has a Big 12 win is BYU, which came against another newcomer in Cincinnati.
Yeah, and what I'm saying, you heard Phil talk about it, and as you just pointed out, Schuyler, Kansas State is going to have their hands full in Stillwater. He made some great points. Mike Gundy, tremendous coach. They're coming off a bye week. They recognize this is a crossroads for their season, an opportunity against the defending Big 12 champs. They're going to take Oklahoma State's best shot. Texas Tech is going on the road. Baylor is starting to believe in themselves. And meanwhile, I promise you, there is a significant contingent among the Texas Tech fan base that's thinking, oh, do you see what Texas did to Baylor?
Yeah.
Get rid of that UCF. We should waltz in there and just handle business. Come on, we're favored. And there's Kansas State fans thinking, oh, come on. Have you not watched Oklahoma State play? Didn't you see that South Alabama game? They got walloped by South Alabama. That's an automatic win. Be careful.
It's never as easy as you think.
It's difficult to win all the games you're supposed to. And if you survive that one, there'll be another game they're supposed to win. Then you got to survive it, and so on. So now I'll tell you what, it's refreshing to have these conversations again, that we're talking about expectations instead of being on the business end of those expectations, right? So
yeah,
I mean, we're 4-1. There's way more football left to play than we've played so far, so we have a lot to prove. I mean, 2-0 in the Big 12 is a great start, but we have a lot to prove.
Absolutely.
I would say, first and foremost, let's get to number 5, and then don't look now, but you're bowl eligible with number 6. So you take these things a step at a time, a game at a time, understanding that if you don't play well each week, favored, not favored, I don't care. I don't care if you're playing at home, on the road, or on the moon. If you don't play well, any of these teams can beat you. And remember the 12 teams theory. It's not going to be, well, how can that West Virginia team that beat TCU lose to such and such? It's not going to be that West Virginia team that beat TCU. It's going to be a different version. The question is, will it be a better version, a similar version? We don't know. That's the difficulty in managing young football players.
And the good teams are, if West Virginia puts their 8th best version out, can that 8th best version still find a way to win? And also, I mean, like I said, there's going to be a lot of games where West Virginia is going to be favored, and you kind of worry about how they handle that. Well, again, Neil can still dangle that little carrot out there, says, hey, look, it doesn't matter. You're still preseason pick 14th. So until the end of the season, you're the 14th best team in this conference. And I think he even said that in the little cinematic recap that they put out there on Twitter. Yeah, that you're 14th until proven otherwise. So, and I really like.
Hey, we won 3 games in a row, despite being ranked,
and you're still underdogs.
And we're 14-point underdogs. He used the 14 theme. He said we're 14. That's what he told the team in the locker room. 14-point underdogs. So, yep.
And this is a great opportunity for West Virginia. Again, you just survived, not survived. You passed that September test with flying colors in a very, very tough schedule. You have 3 games in the month of October. You're 3 games away from playing what everyone wants to get to, and that's meaningful football in November. And if you get to meaningful football in November, that means you got a chance to do something special. So it's a great time, as we mentioned time and time again, for West Virginia to get to this bye week, to get healthy somewhat. They maybe find some answers to some of those injuries that they're going to have to find answers to. And who knows what can happen. It could be a special 2023 season in Morgantown. One final thank you to Fortis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. Make sure to visit fortis.us.com. And again, if you haven't yet, please participate in our weekly picks. It's a lot of fun. It's a tough thing to do. But we have the poll, I believe, on our Twitter account, In the Gun Podcast. If you want to try to beat me, Jed, Owen, and Wes, and if you get all 4 right, you're getting a rookie card signed by Owen Schmidt, plus a shout out. Who knows what else we'll come up with, but it's a very difficult thing to do. And we had one guy get 3 right last week.
We did.
So he's close. Brian Moffitt.
Put his picture on the show. Yeah.
Yeah, we put his picture on the show. So we'll definitely make it worth your while. And if you haven't also, go ahead.
Now, when Brian Moffitt submitted that and we saw his name on the play sheet, first thing I thought was Ben Moffitt, the old linebacker for South Florida. I still have Ben Moffitt nightmares from those South games. But anyway, congratulations to Brian Moffitt and lovely family. He was telling us a little bit about himself. He's a WVU grad, graduated in 2001, but a Mountaineer for life. He met his wife at WVU 25 years ago. So exactly the type of person that we think it's really cool to have him as a listener and to be taking part in our Pick 4 contest. That makes this really fun.
And as you and Wes really pointed out too, I believe it was in one of the episodes earlier this week, like if you get this right and you're the first one to do it, you're an ITG legend. Like everyone's going to remember who that first person is. Everyone will remember. So you definitely want to be that first one. Exactly. So you can check out this week's episodes. It's Big Daddy, and then the preview is obviously not here this week, so it's just Big Daddy, our weekly picks, and then here with Phil Steele. But we will be back again with that abbreviated schedule next week. We're going to wrap things up into one with Big Daddy and our picks, and then the Houston preview as well. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube at In the Gun Podcast, and let us know what you want to see coming up here in the upcoming weeks for West Virginia. Do you think they can get to 9 or 10 wins? Let us know in the comments section here on YouTube. So that'll do it for us here today. For Jed Drenning, I'm Schuyler. The one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. You've been In the Gun.